As the story continues, the guard quietly honored Daniel's request, removing the royal food and wine and providing only vegetables and water. And over time it became clear that what appeared simple in the eyes of men was strengthened by the favor of God. For the young men did not weaken, but instead grew healthier, clearer in mind, and stronger in body than those who ate from the king's table. And in this quiet faithfulness, God was already at work, shaping hearts that would stand firm in days of testing yet to come. And as the period of training continued, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, granting them wisdom beyond their years, insight beyond instruction, and discernment that could not be taught by Babylonian schools. And to Daniel alone God gave understanding of visions and dreams of all kinds, a gift not sought for honor, but given for purpose. And when the time came for the young men to be brought before King Nebuchadnezzar, none were found equal to Daniel and his companions. And so they entered the king's service not by compromise, but by conviction. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And this was not because of pride or ambition, but because God honors those who remain faithful in quiet obedience, even when surrounded by pressure, temptation, and power. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus, standing as a living testimony that faithfulness does not require isolation from the world, but unwavering devotion within it. And through this story, the gentle truth unfolds that obedience does not always shout, but often whispers. That courage is sometimes found not in confrontation, but in resolve. And that God's presence does not depart when circumstances change. And as the night deepens and these words settle softly, the story of Daniel reminds the listening heart that identity rooted in God cannot be rewritten by names given by men. That nourishment from God sustains more deeply than provision from power, and that quiet trust can shape destinies unseen. And as you rest now, let this truth remain with you, that the same God who strengthened Daniel in a foreign land remains faithful in every place, in every season, and in every quiet moment of trust. And even as sleep approaches and awareness fades, God's watchful care does not rest, guiding, guarding, and sustaining those who choose faithfulness in small things. And through the stillness of the night, His presence remains steady, peaceful, and near. In the 2nd year of his reign, King Nebuchadnezzar had dreams that troubled his spirit so deeply that sleep fled from him. And in his unrest he summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. But when they stood before the king and asked him to tell them the dream so they could interpret it, the king declared that if they could not reveal both the dream and its meaning, they would be put to death. For he knew that if the dream itself was spoken, they could invent an interpretation. And this command struck fear into all the wise men of Babylon, for no one could do what the king demanded. And they confessed that no man on earth could reveal such a matter, for only the gods could do so, and they did not dwell among humans. And in his fury the king ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. And this decree reached Daniel and his companions, who were counted among the wise. And when Daniel learned of the matter, he approached Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, with wisdom and tact, asking why the decree was so harsh. And when he understood the urgency, Daniel requested time from the king so that he might seek the interpretation, and God granted him favor. And Daniel returned to his house and shared the matter with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, urging them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that they would not perish with the rest of the wise men. And that night the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. And Daniel praised the God of heaven, declaring that wisdom and power belong to him, that he changes times and seasons, removes kings and sets up kings, gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning, revealing deep and hidden things, knowing what lies in darkness and dwelling in light. And Daniel thanked God for answering their prayers. And he went to Arioch and urged him not to execute the wise men, asking to be brought before the king to declare the interpretation. And when Daniel stood before Nebuchadnezzar, he did not claim wisdom of his own, but declared that there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And he explained that the dream concerned what would happen in days to come. And Daniel described the dream, saying the king saw a great statue, immense and dazzling, terrifying in appearance, with a head of pure gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. And while the king watched, a rock was cut out not by human hands, striking the statue on its feet and smashing them, and the iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold were broken into pieces and became like chaff blown away by the wind, leaving no trace, but the rock grew into a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And Daniel then revealed the interpretation, explaining that Nebuchadnezzar himself was the head of gold, ruler over a kingdom granted by the God of heaven, and after him would arise another kingdom inferior to his, then another of bronze ruling over the earth, followed by a fourth kingdom strong as iron, crushing and breaking all others. And the divided feet represented a divided kingdom, partly strong and partly brittle. And in the time of those kings the God of heaven would establish a kingdom that would never be destroyed, not left to another people, but crushing all other kingdoms and enduring forever. Just as the stone cut without hands struck the statue, and the dream was true and its interpretation trustworthy. And at this, Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor, acknowledging that Daniel's God was the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries. And the king placed Daniel in a high position, lavishing gifts upon him and making him ruler over the province of Babylon and chief over all the wise men. And at Daniel's request the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego over the affairs of the province, while Daniel remained at the royal court. And through this story the quiet truth unfolds that human power is temporary, but God's kingdom is eternal, that wisdom does not come from position but from prayer, and that when fear threatens to destroy, faith invites God to reveal. And as these words settle softly into the stillness of the night, the story of Daniel reminds the listening heart that no mystery is hidden from God, no situation beyond his reach, and no faithful prayer unheard. And even as sleep approaches and awareness fades, the God who revealed dreams and raised kingdoms remains present, faithful and near. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And he summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image. And when they stood before it, a herald loudly proclaimed that at the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, all people, nations, and languages must fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever did not fall down and worship would immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. And at the sound of the music, all the people fell down and worshipped the image. But at that time some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews, saying that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not serve the king's gods or worship the image he had set up. And furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned them and demanded to know if it was true, offering them another chance to bow down, but warning that if they did not, they would be thrown into the furnace. And he challenged them, asking what God would be able to rescue them from his hand. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied calmly that they did not need to defend themselves, for the God they served was able to deliver them from the blazing furnace and from the king's hand. But even if he did not, they would not serve the king's gods or worship the golden image. And at this Nebuchadnezzar's face changed with fury, and he ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, commanding some of the strongest soldiers to bind the 3 men and throw them into the fire. And because the furnace was so hot, the flames killed the soldiers who carried them. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell bound into the blazing furnace. Then the king leaped to his feet in amazement and asked if 3 men had been thrown in. And when they answered yes, he said he saw 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looked like a son of the gods. And Nebuchadnezzar approached the furnace and called for them to come out. And when they emerged, the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. And Nebuchadnezzar praised the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, declaring that he had sent his angel and rescued his servants, who trusted in him, defying the king's command and choosing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own. And the king issued a decree that anyone who spoke against their god would be cut to pieces, for no other god could save in this way, and he promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And through this story, the quiet truth unfolds that faithfulness does not depend on outcomes, that obedience stands firm even when threatened by fire, and that God's presence does not always remove the trial but walks within it. And as these words settle softly into the stillness of the night, the story reminds the listening heart that no flame is stronger than God's protection, no power greater than his presence. And even as sleep approaches and awareness fades, the God who walked in the fire remains faithful, near, and unchanging. King Nebuchadnezzar wrote to all peoples, nations, and languages who lived in all the earth, declaring peace be multiplied to you. And he testified that it seemed good to him to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God had done for him. For how great are his signs, and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. And the king said that while he was at home in his palace, contented and prosperous, he had a dream that made him afraid. And as he lay in bed, the images and visions that passed through his mind terrified him. So he summoned all the wise men of Babylon to interpret the dream. But though the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners came in, none could explain it, until Daniel came before him, whom the king called Belteshazzar, after the name of his god, and in whom was the spirit of the holy God. And Nebuchadnezzar told Daniel the dream, saying that he saw a tree in the midst of the earth whose height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, its top touched the sky, and it was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it the beasts of the field found shelter, and in its branches the birds lived, and all creatures were fed from it. And as he watched, a holy one, a messenger, came down from heaven and called loudly to cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee, and the birds leave its branches. But let the stump remain in the ground, bound with iron and bronze, and let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal until 7 times pass by for him. And the decision was announced by messengers, so that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes, and sets over them the lowliest of people. And when Daniel heard the dream, he was deeply troubled for a time, and his thoughts terrified him. But the king urged him not to let the dream or its meaning alarm him. And Daniel answered that the dream applied to the king himself, explaining that the tree represented Nebuchadnezzar, who had become great and strong, whose greatness had grown until it reached the sky, and whose dominion extended to distant parts of the earth. And the command to cut down the tree meant that the king would be driven away from people and live with the wild animals, eating grass like cattle and being drenched with the dew of heaven, until he acknowledged that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms and gives them to anyone he wishes. But the stump left in the ground meant that his kingdom would be restored to him when he acknowledged heaven's rule. And Daniel urged the king to renounce his sins by doing what is right, and his wickedness by being kind to the oppressed, that perhaps his prosperity might continue. But all this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. For 12 months later, as the king walked on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" And even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven declaring that the kingdom had been taken from him. And immediately he was driven away from people and ate grass like cattle, his body drenched with the dew of heaven, until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. And at the end of that time Nebuchadnezzar raised his eyes toward heaven, and his sanity was restored. And he praised the Most High, honoring and glorifying him who lives forever, declaring that his dominion is eternal and his kingdom endures from generation to generation, that all the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing, and he does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" And at the same time his sanity was restored. His honor and splendor returned to him for the glory of his kingdom. His advisors and nobles sought him out, and he was restored to his throne and became even greater than before. And Nebuchadnezzar praised and exalted and glorified the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride he is able to humble. And as these words settle softly into the stillness of the night, the story reminds the listening heart that pride fades, but God's sovereignty remains. That humility restores what arrogance destroys, and that the Most High rules gently yet firmly over all. And even as sleep approaches and awareness fades, his dominion remains sure, his care remains present, and his peace remains near. King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. And while Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. And so they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem. And the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines drank from them. And as they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. And suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. And the king watched the hand as it wrote, and his face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak, and his knees knocked together. And the king called out for the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners to be brought, and said that whoever read this writing and told him what it meant would be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and would be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. But none of the wise men could read the writing or tell the king what it meant. And so King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. And his nobles were baffled, and the queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall and said that there was a man in his kingdom who had the spirit of the holy gods in him, one who, in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, had been found to have insight, intelligence, and wisdom like that of the gods. And she reminded the king that this man, Daniel, was able to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. And so Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him that he had heard that Daniel had the spirit of the gods in him, and that light, understanding, and wisdom were found in him. And he explained the writing on the wall, and promised rewards if Daniel could interpret it. But Daniel answered that the king could keep his gifts for himself, and give his rewards to someone else. Yet he would read the writing and tell him what it meant. And Daniel reminded the king how the Most High God had given Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor, and how because of his high position people feared and trembled before him. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and sets over them anyone he wishes. And Daniel said that Belshazzar had not humbled himself, though he knew all this, but instead had set himself up against the Lord of heaven by using the vessels from his temple and praising lifeless gods that cannot see or hear or understand. And he did not honor the God who holds in his hand his life and all his ways. And therefore God sent the hand that wrote the inscription. And this was the inscription written, Mene Mene Tekel Parsin. And Daniel explained that Mene meant God had numbered the days of the king's reign and brought it to an end. Tekel meant the king had been weighed on the scales and found wanting. And Parsin meant the kingdom was divided and given to the Medes and Persians. And then, at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. And that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. And as these words settle softly into the stillness of the night, the story reminds the listening heart that pride blinds, that mockery of the holy brings ruin, and that God's judgment arrives exactly on time, never late and never early. And even as sleep approaches and awareness fades, the Most High remains sovereign, watchful, and just, ruling gently yet firmly over all kingdoms and all hearts. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel, so that the satraps might be accountable and the king might not suffer loss. And Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. And at this the administrators and satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs. But they were unable to do so, for they could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. And finally, these men said that they would never find any basis for charges against Daniel unless it had something to do with the law of his God. So they went as a group to the king and said that King Darius should live forever, and that all the royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors had agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prayed to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to the king, would be thrown into the lion's den. And they urged the king to issue the decree and put it in writing so that it could not be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. And so King Darius put the decree in writing. And when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. And then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went before the king and spoke about the royal decree, reminding him that anyone who prayed to any god or human being except the king during the 30 days must be thrown into the lion's den. And the king answered that the decree stood, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. And then they said to the king that Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, paid no attention to the king or the decree, but continued to pray 3 times a day. And when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sunset to save him. And then the men went together to the king and said that the king must remember that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict issued by the king can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel that his God, whom he served continually, would rescue him. And a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring, and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. And then the king returned to his palace, and spent the night without eating, and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. And at the first light of dawn the king got up and hurried to the lion's den, and when he came near the den he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, asking if Daniel's God, whom he served continually, had been able to rescue him from the lions. And Daniel answered, saying that the king should live forever, and that his God had sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions, that they had not hurt him because he was found innocent in God's sight, nor had he ever done any wrong before the king. And the king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And at the king's command the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lions' den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. And then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, declaring peace be multiplied to you. And he issued a decree that in every part of his kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, and his dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. And he has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. And so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And as these words settle softly into the stillness of the night, the story reminds the listening heart that faithfulness in prayer is never wasted, that God honors those who trust him quietly and consistently, and that no den is dark enough to block his protection. And even as sleep approaches and awareness fades, the God who shut the lions' mouths remains faithful, watchful, and near. Bro, understood. Below is next part, Daniel chapter 7. Written as one single continuous paragraph. No jogline breaks, no jogline gaps. Scripture style narration. Suitable for sleep listening per night Bible storytelling. This is the maximum possible length in one response. It continues seamlessly. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he lay on his bed. And he wrote down the substance of his dream, saying that he looked, and there before him were the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea, and four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. And the first was like a lion, and had the wings of an eagle. And he watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground, so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before him was a second beast, which looked like a bear, raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told to get up and eat its fill of flesh. And after that he looked, and there before him was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird, and this beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. And after that, in his vision at night, he looked, and there before him was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth, and it crushed and devoured its victims, and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns, and while he was thinking about the horns, there before him was another horn, a little one, which came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. And this horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. And as he looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow, and the hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened, and then he continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. And he kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. And the other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. And in his vision at night he looked, and there before him was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. And he approached the Ancient of Days, and was led into his presence. And he was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. And Daniel himself was troubled in spirit, and the visions disturbed him. So he approached one of those standing there, and asked the true meaning of all this. And he explained that the 4 great beasts are 4 kings that will rise from the earth. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom, and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. And then Daniel wanted to know the meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with its iron teeth and bronze claws, and which crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. And about the 10 horns on its head, and the other horn that came up before which 3 fell, the horn that looked more imposing than the others, and spoke boastfully. And as Daniel watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them, until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High. And the time came when they possessed the kingdom. And he explained that the 4th beast is a 4th kingdom that will appear on earth, different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. And the 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom, and after them another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people, and try to change the set times and the laws. And the holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit, and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. And then the sovereignty, power and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. And this is the end of the matter. And Daniel said that his thoughts greatly alarmed him, and his face turned pale. But he kept the matter in his heart.